I am Nicole Khalil, and you're listening to the This Is Woman's Work podcast. From boardrooms to studios, kitchens to coding dens, we explore the multifaceted experiences of today's woman, confirming that the new definition of woman's work is whatever feels true and real and right for you. You are the decider, which is designed to be motivating and empowering, but it's also a little daunting, right? Like, I'm the decider. I can't even decide what I want for dinner tonight. And listen, I get it. And one of the things that I've noticed in my personal quest to define what it looks and feels like for me to be doing woman's work is that I often find it easier to define what I don't want, even easier than defining what I do. I mean, think about it. When someone asks what you want in a partner or a boss or even what you want for dinner, don't you usually start with a quick mental list of the things you want to avoid? Bad communicators, micromanagers, sushi if it's a Monday, whatever it is that we want, we often get clarity by way of eliminating our hard no's first. And maybe that sounds pessimistic, but in my experience as a realist, which is what most good pessimists call themselves, whether it's in life, leadership, or yes, even woman's work, that process of eliminating the no's first, it works. It's how I figured out who I am and what my brand stands for. I'd see speakers who are way over the top, or coaches who shove their rigid one-size-fits-all solution down our throats, or podcast hosts who seem to be manifesting sunshine and rainbows on a loop. And I knew that's not me, which helped me see more clearly who I am and who I want to be, which is authentic, curious, and let's be real, prone to the more than occasional rant. And that's what today's conversation is about. Because whether you're building a career, a movement, or a life that you love, sometimes the clarity comes not from declaring what you are, but from boldly deciding who you're not. I learned from today's guest that in branding terms, that means identifying your strategic enemy. Knowing what you're not helps people understand more quickly and clearly what you are. And when it comes to building a brand or a life worth fighting for, sometimes the best way to rally people to you is to first draw the line in the sand about what you stand against. So let's dive in. Lara Ries is a world-famous brand marketing expert, positioning strategist, and best-selling author of the new book, The Strategic Enemy. As chairwoman of Ries, the global consulting firm, she continues the legacy of her late father, Al Ries. Lara has spent more than 30 years shaping how we think about brands and positioning, and she's co-authored several groundbreaking books that have redefined modern marketing and is frequently tapped on the shoulder for marketing analysis as well as working with major news outlets. So basically, Lara knows what she's talking about, and I'm thrilled to have you as our guest. And I'd love to kick you off by talking about why you believe it's important to identify an enemy or what you're not when it comes to building our own personal brands.
Well, listen, you set it up perfectly. You understand opposition much faster than superiority. So most people say, hey, I'm great at this, but that's not really believable. When you say and start with that line in the sand, what you're not, it's more instantly believable and makes it clear when you say you're not. That actually in reverse makes it more clear what you stand for.
Okay, so I like this idea because you're right when people say that I'm the best at or the greatest at, and then it almost becomes a little bit competitive, right? Like everybody says they're good at what they do or they wouldn't be doing it. So then it's believing that you're better than, not just good at, where, yeah, again, this makes sense to my brain.
It's all about branding. It's most companies, most people try to focus on being better. Now, listen, there's nothing wrong with being better, but when you're trying to build a brand, that's something in the mind. You have to deal with the reality of the mind, and the perception is what matters in the mind. And when you can talk about the difference, when you make that contrast between two things, it makes that decision process a lot more easier. I mean, think about, you set up some examples, starting with, what do you want for dinner, right? Much faster to go with, I don't want this, right? I don't want burgers. I don't want fries. Or in another case, when you're asking your children, if you ask them, what do you want for dinner? If you just leave it open, right? If you put in, do you want burgers or do you want chicken? You have that contrast that makes it more clear and actually easier for them to decide.
Yeah. I think of, again, being a podcast host, I don't think I have the best podcasts in the world, and I'm not going to win anybody over by trying to claim that. But what I can do is separate myself. I don't have a sunshine and rainbows and toxic positivity podcast, which lets you know that, what
And
I'm not, but also that I'm prone to ranting, or I'm not going to be positive all the time, or what have you.
it's such a perfect example because that instantly makes you very memorable and very understandable and relatable, right? By very clearly saying, I'm not about rainbows. And think about that. That's also a visual word. It's very important in branding when you can use words that are visualized, that hits in multiple places in your brain to make it more emotional, more memorable, more easy to understand. So when we can use words that are visualized, that helps the process even more.
Okay. So you perfectly teed me up, because my next question is going to be, how do we do this? Like, how do we define our enemy or what we're not? Are we looking for a person, an idea, a strategy, a thing? Like, help us break this down.
Instantly, when you say an enemy, people think it's a specific company or a specific person. No, it could be a competitor. Many times it's another category. Let's say the previous category and you're launching a new one, or it could be a convention of the old way of doing or the hard way of doing versus the simple way of doing, or even a concept like time itself could be the enemy. I, volunteer with, it's called the Young Men's Service League. These are moms and their high school sons that do community service. And you think, well, how can a nonprofit try to do all good, have an enemy? But they can. And they very strongly identified what that enemy was. And that was the fast 4 years of high school. Because listen, when you tell a mom with a ninth grade son, it's going to go by really fast, she's like, no way. But that is actually very true. As I've been on the other side of that, it does blow by. And when you reflect as a senior, you're like, did I spend that time well? Did I impart in him, values, and do we have great times and memorable experiences? And that was a very key driver of setting up what that enemy is to make it clear and the benefit and the time worth spent in devoting to the service.
Okay. Yeah. I think of a brand that I love. It's Cake Spotty. They do nipple covers.
Oh,
But the enemy that they set up early that just resonates as nipple freak out. And they're combating nipple freak out. And the idea is like when you're in a cold aisle in the grocery store, or when, the room is really cold or
I'll
whatever.
make
And
sure.
it's like, right. I know. And I have my cakes on right now. But we all know that moment or that feeling where you're like, oh, crap, my nipples are leading the charge here. And so, like, that to me was the enemy that we could all
Well, you
relate
connect
to.
to it. It's relatable. It's more believable. And we're motivated by fear, right? It's much harder to, try to convince someone how great you are, but it's much easier to say, you don't want to have nipples. Or, for many, many great companies have focused on this using that strategic enemy. What did Skims do? Yes, Kim Kardashian could probably sell snow to the Eskimos, but her brand of $4 billion, their enemy, beige shapewear. The color beige, or some in the fashion say it nude. All people are not beige. And her inclusive, range of colors, range of sizes, set up a very effective strategic enemy that she goes against. And when you have that focus on what you're fighting against, that's what makes it worth fighting for. It's much easier to fight against something than just for something. Or Bumble is another great example. What is the enemy there? Men swiping right on you. On Bumble, and I haven't been on there, I'm married, but on Bumble, women get to make the first move. A very effective strategy. And what happens, most people just say, we're going to go in there, we're going to have better service, better pricing, better. Instead of thinking, how can we dramatically be different and showcase it against a very contrasting strategic enemy that makes our side more, relatable to a certain sect of people.
Okay. I want to dive into the very last thing you said, a certain sect of people. I think a lot of times we, especially as women, think part of branding is to capture the most amount of people, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we tend to water ourselves down, or people please our way through, or, we're trying to be all things to all people. And the reality is, when we do this, we are eliminating, a certain segment of people or a lot of people. Like,
Yeah, well,
fair or no?
Um, well, here's the thing. I mean, the way to build a brand is to stand for something, right? To narrow the focus so you can get that idea in the mind. Now, even if you have a narrow focus, and the danger is trying to appeal to everyone. And when you try to appeal to everyone, sell everything, you don't have something to stand for. You don't have something to fight against, most importantly. But here's the thing about let's say a target, it's not necessarily the same as the market. For example, go back in time, the Marlboro Cowboy and the Marlboro cigarette, was a very, very specific target, but that wasn't the market, right? If they just sold it to cowboys, that'd be very small. Believe this, that the largest selling cigarette among women was Marlboro. They related to the cowboy imagery that was, associated with the brand. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're excluding anyone just because, you're focused on a specific target.
Okay. Okay. This is fascinating. My brain is, I think, working hard to try to catch up. So standing for something. So like I think of personal example is, I am not toxic positivity, manifesting sunshine and rainbows, blah, blah, blah. So people who are very positive or very, are looking for uplifting all the time
Yeah.
or whatever, they're not gonna gravitate towards my brand. Am I doing a disservice? Like, how do we figure out how to stand for something without eliminating the market?
Well, because if you don't, you're not going to be remembered as, if you don't stand for something, you're unlikely to build a brand, you're unlikely to get in the mind, and you're unlikely to attract listeners. And listen, all of us don't choose one brand all the time. I mean, even if you're a happy person, sometimes you don't want the rainbows. I mean, being a choice for a certain, period of time or part of the day, I mean, that makes it, a reason to tune in, right? Instead of, I don't know what I'm going to get, or it'll be a little bit of everything. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, people do have multiple brands and they do buy from different companies at different times and over your life cycle. I mean, you think about a car, you don't stick with one car brand over your whole life. When you're young, you might, pick a small car. When you get kids, right? I immediately went out, had my first child. I got a Volvo because that was the safe car. I couldn't be driving a BMW with the baby. I mean, we, different times of our lives, different, feelings that we have, we make different choices. But the most important thing is your brand stands for something so that, people, when they want that choice, they go for you.
Also, like thinking of Skims, the example that you gave, I'm not personally a big Kim Kardashian fan. I'm not going to say anything negative about her, but she's not who I'm attracted to. And yet I wear Skims, wearing them today. So I think there is something to be said for different things, different times, different people. Also, like we are not just one way all the time ourselves. So we might
Sure.
brand ourselves in different ways at different times.
Sure, but I do think that the most powerful thing a brand can do is to stay consistent and over
Okay.
the long term. And so, I mean, obviously, as people, we do. I mean, we're talking companies versus people. People do change and evolve. But if you can have one, I call it an anchor that keeps you grounded. And if you're not the rainbow, that's the anchor, which I think is a very powerful one that a lot of people can relate to and like to have as part of their listening experience. It's like music. You don't always listen to the same song or the same type of music. You like the variety. I mean, I think that is a powerful part of life, but you do pick the specialist. And that's one of the dangers, I call it, don't be your own worst enemy. And that comes from, line extending or try to be too many things to too many people, because people don't think brand first. They think category first. I mean, if you're going to have an alcoholic beverage, you don't say, okay, I'd like a Bud Light. Which kind Bud Light would I like? Would I like a seltzer? Would I like a Next? Would I like a Bud Light Arita? No, nobody thinks like that. They think, do I want a beer? Do I want a hard seltzer? Do I want a hard lemonade? Do I want a non-alcoholic beer? And once they make that category decision, then they look in their mind and say, what is the dominant brand or the brand I like the most in that category? And that's going to be the winner. So categories are incredibly important. Of course, we talk in brands, but we think in categories.
Okay. Interesting. So branding and marketing, clearly not my area of expertise and something, I've personally struggled with on the business side, even more than the personal side. I think I've had an easier time figuring out who I am and want to be in life. And then translating that into my business has been much more challenging. So my question is, what's the best way to build a brand? You talked about consistency. You talked about categories. Help us think through the do's and don'ts of building a brand?
Sure. Well, I mean, listen, it's very challenging to do this to yourself. I mean, even myself, I'm updating my website. It's very challenging to work on your own brand. So it is helpful to have, an outsider, a trusted advisor, or a consultant or something like this to help you because they have fresh eyes on it. They see it
Mhm.
from the outsider's perspective to understand what the perceptions of you are and, what things you can do to leverage that perception to build your brand. Now, when it comes to a brand, the most important thing is a narrow focus, what you stand for. Secondly, it's very important not to be customer focused, but to be competitor focused, right? You're not just trying to please your customer when you think only in that direction. And it's not wrong to be nice to your customer or help them out, but you expand and you kind of get away from what that focus is. Instead, when you're competitor focused, you have to look at the landscape to say, I'm out there in the world. I'm not just one, thing. I'm being compared to other things. So what can I do best to set up a difference, right? So whether it is my skill or even our visual. So I talk about visual hammers, and visual distinctiveness is incredibly important in branding. So when you think about a personal brand, that, many times can be, even what you wear. For example, I always wear red. Jensen Huang in video wears a black leather jacket. Steve Jobs wore a black turtleneck. It was, the uniform, if you will, but the consistency of when you saw it, you saw the uniform, you saw the person, and then that, what it did was drive in for Steve Jobs. It was innovation, but then it connected to what he was looked like and making that more memorable with the more connections in the mind.
Okay. What do you see some of the mistakes that we're making in branding?
Well, I think, being too general instead of being specific. Again, it comes down to, trying to appeal to more people, but to build the brand, to be memorable, to get noticed, to break through the clutter, you have to be as narrow as possible. And you think about, for example, an example like BMW. They try to, talk about all the advantages of a car. And a car is a big, expensive purchase, from the gas mileage and the styling and the driving and the this and the that. And they were 17th in imported cars in America. And then what did they do? They narrow the focus to one idea. Now people get scared. If I only say one thing, they're not going to think anything else. No, no, no. It's the halo effect. Because if you can own one strong idea in the mind, people will give you the rest. They'll think that you're good in other areas, but you have to break through and repeat that one thing. And the ultimate driving machine said over and over again. Nike is Just Do It, talking about, the athletic performance and inspiring you to greatness. That's a very powerful idea. But at the other end, there's always, no matter how big, no matter how powerful, a brand or a competitor or dominant company may be, there's always a weakness in every strength. And you think about, for example, Nike. What did Skechers do? Right? It's the anti-Nike. Right? It's comfortable. It's not about athletics. It's about, sneakers for the rest of us that just want a great pair of shoes. So you can always leverage being different, but it's very hard to just try to be better.
Okay. Like my brain is spinning. So I guess where does the strategic enemy play in? Is that when you're on this competitor focus and you're trying to
Yes,
figure
of
out?
course.
Okay.
Yeah. So because when you're looking at, say, whatever the dominant brand is. So for example, in dog food, for years I fed my dog, the most expensive kibble at the store. I mean, I thought the veterinarian said it was good, and then comes along the farmer's dog. And they're positioned as, fresh dog food. It's sold by prescription. It has your dog, but they don't just talk about the benefits of fresh dog food. They also line up the strategic enemy. Because first, remember this, you got to unsell me at what I'm previously doing to get me to change my purchasing. So they have brilliantly they've called out that enemy, not by a brand name, but by calling it burnt brown balls. And these are highly processed food. You don't want to feed your dog processed food every meal of its life. That will shorten its lifespan. So being very specific, calling out that enemy, and then repeating that over and over is what builds. And the more you say something, the more believable it is. And that's why things like just do it. I mean, saying it once is one thing, but saying it decades makes it even more memorable.
So do you ever find people get in trouble like with what did you say, burnt brown balls or
Burnt
whatever?
brown balls.
Like, do you ever face backlash from your competitors, or like, do you care about that? Like, can you get yourself in trouble by going too hard against someone or something?
You certainly want to call out something that is, you can't just say the competitor sucks. right? Because,
Right.
it's not, it has to be something very specific that's maybe even visible to see, understandable. Listen, the, was Dunkin' Donuts had a great Super Bowl commercial. It was the, going up against the barista buds, right? And you had Ben Affleck. But because it dealt with the perception already in the mind that Starbucks is more expensive and the long wait times and the complicated menus. I mean, that was a very strong perception already held. And so that
Mhm.
reinforced, the distinctiveness and the contrast between the two brands. And they have a very nice slogan to go along with it, right? America runs on Dunkin', right? It is the coffee that's fueling, America's hard workers, which I think is a very nice and simplistic contrast to make.
Yeah. I live just outside of Boston, so I am obsessed with the Dunkin' social media account and
Yes.
their branding, and they're just
So good.
I'm more into their branding and marketing than I am into their coffee, and it's I think because I grew up in California and I tend to just think, "Oh, let's go to Starbucks," but, Dunkin' is winning me over big time. I want one of their tracksuits. I'm, like, all in.
I have one. I
Do you?
have it. I have the whole, oh my gosh, I have the socks. I have the whole thing. I got it for my sons. It's amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, it's so powerful because it's a stark contrast. I mean, and listen, here's the thing. Both sides have a strong position. There's a great position for Starbucks and, the coffee and the third place and the, fancy drinks. But there's also always the reverse is a very strong position as well as, the coffee, the fun, the colors. I mean, the bright orange. It's so powerful that both visual distinctiveness as well as the positioning distinctiveness is what drives those brands.
Okay.
And
So
people
I'm
love
gonna
to pick a side. They love to debate. That's the other thing. When you
Yeah.
can have those two dueling brands, it helps everybody. It generates excitement in the category and it sets up, what side you're on. And even though most of us probably drink from both places.
Right. Okay. I know some of our listeners are entrepreneurs or, in branding and marketing. What advice do you have for somebody who's looking to build their brand for their business?
Well, especially, when entrepreneurs are starting up and you're trying to, start your brand, you got to think of two important factors. One is what is the category? And do we have an opportunity to create a new category for this brand? That's the most powerful thing to be first in a new category, to dominate that new category and to rise with that category. That's exactly what Tesla did. They narrowed their focus to electric vehicles. It was a slow start, but they dominate the mind and today they dominate the market. Now, the category is important, but the brand name is also critically important. And many people make a sad mistake in choosing their name and they try to have the, cute, they try to be too generic to the category. So you have Lyft, for example, competing against Uber. But if I say, do you need a lift? It looks good on a piece of paper, but think in the mind, it's a sound. You don't see the words, you think in sounds. And so that is exactly the same thing, whether the lift, L-I-F-T or L-Y-F-T is the same. And that's confusing. So the brand name is incredibly important. So companies thinking about that, whether it's the Farmer's Dog versus Fresh Pet, who they compete against. Fresh Pet is a weak name. Farmer's Dog is much stronger. It's specific, it's more memorable, and it makes that contrast very clear. It's also just focused on dogs, which is nice.
Okay. So, same question, but for those of our listeners who maybe aren't entrepreneurs or don't have a business, I have the belief that we all have a brand, right? We are living billboards for who we are and what we value.
Yeah.
And, so for the individual who's maybe thinking more from a personal branding perspective, any advice there?
I mean, think about first of all, think about what you love. Everyone should be doing what they love, not trying to be, there's a lot of talk about, how people have a persona online. Forget about it. It should be you. Otherwise, it's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be real and it's not going to be any fun, right?
Hmm.
You should be real and you should have confidence in that. But also, try to think about what it is you want to stand for. What is going to be your mantra? Is it rainbows or is it anti-rainbows, right?
Right.
For me, it's positioning. I mean, that's what I talk about. That's what I hammer. And just know it might get a little boring, but the best brands know that it's the reinforcement of that. So, trying to be a new thing every day instead of picking one lane and having, a post every day about, crazy ads you see. I like to post on my Instagram about crazy line extensions I see. Did you know they had Morton Salt now they have a cleaning product? That's crazy. But that's kind of my take on the world, and you become known for that. And even down to what you dress, it can be a unique thing to pick that uniform, pick a color. I'm red. Taylor Swift is orange and everything now is orange, right? I mean, it was a very effective way to have that clear idea, clear identity, clear focus, and then repeat, repeat, repeat.
Okay. So on that note, what would you say to somebody like me who's like, I'm not sure yet and I don't want to get stuck, right? So like I haven't picked a color, or in my world, if I'm thinking competitors, I mean, obviously Mel Robbins doesn't see me as a competitor. I think of that as more of an aspirational thing, but like she has her glasses.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, glasses probably shouldn't be my thing, even though I wear glasses. How do you sort through the mind fuck of all of this and like get in on something that you're willing to commit to or stick with for an extended period of time? Like at the beginning of the podcast, I often say, redefining what it means and what it looks and feels like to be doing woman's work in the world today. But so often I am preparing a podcast. I'm like, I'm not going to say that again. It's getting so old. People must be bored with that. Like,
no, they're not
okay.
bored. They're not bored. Think about it's the repetition of that's why you have cheers at football games, or you repeat the same phrases. It energizes people. It reminds them, it reinforces. And unfortunately it can be boring for the person itself, but for the listener, I mean, that gives them the mojo. That reminds them why they're there every, episode, or, every time. Very interesting statistic. There was a study done of who paid the most attention to automobile car advertising. And you would think, well, somebody who wants to buy a car, duh. That wasn't true. It was actually the people that had just bought the car and they were watching the commercial to reinforce the decision that they already made. Again, reinforcing it is always a good idea. And that's, a very, very important thing for people to remember.
Okay. So would your recommendation be to pick an imagery, pick a color, and just go with it as long as you love it? Or
style, or, we had a mayor here who would put a big flower, pin every time she appeared. It can be many things. I mean, Seth Godin with his, bald head and his glasses. There's lots of different things you can do. But here's the thing. You can play around and do, try different things. You're only a brand when you become noticed and you become famous, right? So,
right.
People don't pay attention to all the, things you might try early on. It's only when you're well established that it becomes very difficult to change that brand. Yeah. Or it becomes a big news event, right? If you change your brand or that kind of thing. And maybe that's part of your play as well. But think back, I don't know if you know the brand Lalo, but it's a child furniture and toys and everything. But they tried many products before they really hit it big with the high chair. They had a stroller, but few people remember that. Because there were other strong stroller brands like Bugaboo and others. So that wasn't, a big hit. It was the high chair that was, the minimalist design that really stood out, and, letting, people think that their ugly plastic high chair wasn't going to ruin the decor of their house when you bring that baby home.
Yeah. Okay. I think there are some obvious answers to this question, but how do you know when it's working? How do you know when you're being noticed for your brand, and like when to lock in versus when to pivot?
Whether or not it is something that is picked up and verbalized by other people, that's the true test. Because think about, the brand, you saying it is one thing, but it's when other people say it, relate to it, and repeat it, that's when you know it's working, when other people notice it. And so, even talking to people, I mean, the elevator test is a great one, right? You get in the elevator, can you quickly tell someone what you do, and do they get excited? Do they resonate it? Even with my book, early on, you're so nervous, like, is this going to work? Do we like the cover? Do we like the title? But in talking to people, those reactions are what fueled me. Or in some cases, we made dramatic pivots when our initial title was a total loser. We made the change to something much stronger because it really got the conversation going and made sense.
Yeah. I actually think that's probably the best example I have in my book title. We had started with the Confidence Con, and I was talking to people, and it was like people were somewhat interested, and then when it got to validation is for parking, you could like actually see people's reactions, and it was exactly what we wanted. But it took some massaging and some figuring out, and some like, oh, that's not quite having the response or the reaction, or people aren't going to remember that when they walk out of the elevator. But validation is for parking, they do.
It's a brilliant title, again, because it lends itself to a visual in the mind, and that's always a stronger position. Well, one of my book titles, we Initially, when we started writing, it was going to be the PR era. I mean, boring, but we ended up calling it calling it the fall of advertising and the rise of PR. I mean, talk about calling out a strategic enemy. But here's the thing: if you read the book, we actually don't say that advertising is terrible. We just say that it's not very effective. It's not very useful in launching a brand because you don't have credentials, you don't have the money. But advertising is incredibly important in reinforcing a brand and reminding people of what you stand for and defending against competitors that are going to compete with you. But the title was very provocative and set up that contrast. And then of course on the cover we had the run over sock puppet, which was one of the most iconic disastrous ad campaigns of launching a brand purely with advertising instead of PR.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know I'm pre-ordering the book right now, The Strategic Enemy, and I'm sure our listeners are going to want to dive into it as well because I just find this so important and fascinating and frankly really hard. And as you said earlier, having that outside perspective, I think of the quote, it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle. And that's where we are with ourselves and with our businesses, right? We're in it.
Yeah.
And so using outside resources, whether that be a book or, your actual services and things like that, I think can be incredibly helpful. So again, reminder to you, the listener, the book is called The Strategic Enemy. You can also go to strategicenemy.com and we're going to put all of the ways to find and follow Lara in show notes as well. Lara, thank you for the work that you're doing. I wish you could just brand me and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. So fun.
All right, friend, building and being a brand that you care so deeply about, that's so true to you that you're willing to fight for, that flies in the face of the messaging we've been fed for so long up to this point, which is fit in, don't make waves, be everything to everyone. And for the love of God, make sure you look good while doing it. And that is exactly why I love this concept, because I have yet to meet a person who's found joy, contentment, or real success by playing small and worrying about pleasing everyone. This is about your work, your relationships, your cause, your life, because you're the only one who gets to live it. So name your enemy. Find the hills that you're willing to die on. Discover who you truly are and what you truly want. Reject the shoulds. Give your fingers to the supposed to. Torch the old playbook and write your own damn rules. Who runs the world? You decide, because that is woman's work.